Hi everyone, Alireza Firouzja is taking the chess world by storm right now, and he's actually just broken into the top 3 in the world. And to give you a sense of what an incredible achievement this really is, if you actually look at the GMs that are over 2700 in the world, there's only 39 of them, and they have an average age of 31. Firouzja's just 18 years old, and we haven't seen performance like this for someone of his age since Magnus Carlsen came along. So a really exciting player. And I wanted to show you a game today that he played against Mustafa Yilmaz, a strong Turkish grandmaster, in the recent European Team Championships. So these are being played in Slovenia at the moment, and in the first 5 games Firouzja has won 4 and drawn 1. So Firouzja's playing white here. He kicks off with e4. We have c5 from Yilmaz, the Sicilian defence, knight f3, d6, d4, the open Sicilian, cd, knight takes, knight f6, knight c3, and now a6. The start of the Najdorf variation, popularised by the Argentinian grandmaster Miguel Najdorf. So we have bishop e3 here from Firouzja, and this is known as the English attack. The other very popular move is bishop g5. And what white's looking to do here is storm with the pawns on the king side typically, and castle the king-queen side. Black, for his part, will usually castle king side and try and attack on the queen side. So it's always an exciting game. Now, black pushes e5 here. You can go e6 and go in for these shaven Indian pawn structures. But okay, black goes e5, immediately staking a claim to the centre, especially because this bishop isn't on g5, instantly pressuring the f6 knight. So the knight drops back to b3. We have bishop to e6, defending this d5 weak square further, queen to d2, knight bd7, and now we have the castle's queen side. So we have bishop e7 from black developing, and now h3 from Firouzja, so he's looking to start this kingside initiative with g4, b5 from Yilmaz, and this is a typical break, looking to undermine this c3 knight and also gaining some space. g4, and now rook c8 coming to the open file, and what this supports as well is a later knight maneuver into b6 and then c4. We have king b1, typical move, tidy, getting the king off the open, not open file, but dangerous file against the rook, half open file. So knight b6 now, start of this maneuver from black, g5 from Firouzja, kicking that knight. Now it could go to d7, but what Yilmaz does here is stick it on the edge of the board, and he's trying to stop this h-pawn moving, which is why he puts it there. And it also keeps an eye on this f4 square, stops white pushing that easily, at least not unless white wants to give up the dark squared bishop, which is a powerful piece. So we have pawn to h4 now, knight to c4, and this is very typical now that white just chops that knight off. It's too powerful, and we need the dark squared bishop more than we need the light squared bishop in this position. So the rook recaptures, we have knight to d5, bishop takes. Again, black just can't tolerate living with that knight on this dangerous outpost on d5. Queen recaptures. Now we have queen to c7 from black, hitting this c2 pawn, and a really nice defense from Firouzja now. He just plays knight to d2, because if black jumps in and takes this pawn, then we have the calm response, rook to c1, because after takes, which is forced, now black has some problems due to the fact that they haven't yet castled, and this is why you want to get your king to safety as soon as you can, typically speaking. So the queen has to move. If it were to drop somewhere like, say, b8 or d8, then the problem is white can jump in and give a check on c6, and black's got some difficulties there. So bishop d7, queen d7 would make most sense, stopping that check, and now white can simply carry on with knight to f3. And there's a huge initiative here despite the pawn that's been given. Black can't castle, for example, or else the knight jumps in, takes this pawn, and the pawn is pinned. If you take it, you lose the queen. That's why the pawn wasn't taken. Instead, the move rook c6 was played, just trying to stay solid. We had rook to c1 now. There was some shuffling that went on at this point in the game, but we're about to come to a really key point in the game where Firouzja just played fantastically to seize the initiative. So we had castles now from black, better late than never. Pawn to c3, pawn to g6, rook to c2, rook to b8, bringing more firepower to the queen side, rook h to c1, doubling, and we can start to see the idea here that Firouzja might be playing on the queen side here instead of the king side, and this is where he's so innovative as a player. You know, he's thinking of multiple plans all the time. So we have pawn to a5 from black, getting on with the sensible plan. And here, if you want to pause the video and have a think about what Firouzja played, then please do so. It's a really nice idea which kind of flies in the face of standard principles, but it just shows that they are only positional principles and general rules of thumb. Sometimes you can break them. So he plays pawn to b4, a really nice break. So he's stopping the advance of the b pawn, and essentially he's creating complication in the position here, trying to wrong foot his opponent, and it works superbly. So if black captures this pawn, we can recapture, and now although the c file is opened, because these rooks are doubled, white can actually take advantage quicker than black. Black would be forced to exchange, and now white's won the c file. So if we run it back here, black didn't take the pawn, instead went rook to c8, adding firepower to that file. Now Firouzja could take this pawn here, and that's probably the best move. But again, you have to admire his sight and ambition to play a move like a4 here, which is what he does in the game. And this is really just an awesome idea from Firouzja here, to push these two pawns, b4 and then a4, right in front of your king like this. When black is attacking you on that side of the board, it goes against standard principles of what you should do, and that's why his rating's really been rocketing at the moment. And here black goes wrong, slips up. So black plays pawn takes b4, and this is a mistake. So if you want to pause it and have a look for the tactical shot that Firouzja has, then please do so. So Firouzja plays queen takes c6, exclam. And after the queen recaptures, we have pawn takes on b4, and now the queen is forced to take the rook, because if it moves away, we simply pick up this rook here, and that's just too much for black to cope with, especially with this a pawn then storming down the board. So black chops the rook with the queen, rook recaptures. We now have rook to b8. Black can't afford to swap these rooks, because then this pawn is just storming away, so he tries to keep the rooks on the board. Now we have a5, and this is the problem. Firouzja now has a very dangerous passed pawn storming down the board, supported by this bishop. We have knight to f4, rook to c7, invading on the 7th, bishop to d8, rook to d7, knight to d3, and really it's just a matter of technique now. Firouzja can even chuck this pawn on b4, which the knight is attacking, and it doesn't matter anymore. His positional trumps are just overwhelming here. So he plays pawn to a6, knight captures on b4, and pawn to a7, hitting the rook and supported by this bishop on e3, which is very powerful and was preserved earlier in the game by chopping the knight on c4, if you might remember, with the light squared bishop. So rook to a8, getting in front of the pawn. Rook takes on d6 here, bishop to c7, rook d7, knight a6, and this is really all just a matter of technique now, which is why I'm just running through these moves. So rook to d5, hitting another pawn, bishop a5, and now knight to b3 was the final move of the game. Black chucked in the towel here. As we can see, there's just too many weaknesses. This pawn here, this pawn's tying down the rook, supported by the bishop, and white's minor pieces are just superior to the black ones here. So there's nothing left to play for when you've got grandmasters of this quality playing this position. So a really nice attack by Firouzja, great game once again, and I love how he mixed it up and wasn't afraid to go in for complications, even at the risk of maybe being worse, but this is what he's doing so well right now. So big congratulations to him for breaking into the top 3, and I'm really interested to see whether he can now march on into that 2800 bracket, and he's in the candidates tournament next year as well, so it'd be fantastic if he could do well in that. Who knows, maybe he's the next challenger to Magnus Carlsen, so we'll watch that one keenly. Thanks very much for watching this video. As always, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I hope to see you again in another video.